Chapter 24 of The Radio Boys Trailing a Voice by Alan Chapman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Hirsch. Chapter 24, Lying in Wait. "Doesn't look as though there's going to be much monotony in our young lives tonight," remarked Bob, as, tightly packed in the tonneau of the car, the boys rode on through the gathering darkness. "For that matter, there hasn't been much for several days past," chuckled Joe, who sat at his right. "A fellow would have to be a glutton to want more adventure than we've had since we came to Braxton Woods. What with Buck Looker and Black Donegan, we ought to be pretty well satisfied." "I only hope Casey will be in the gang that's rounded up tonight," observed Herb. "It would be too bad if only the rest were captured, and that all-round scoundrel slipped through the meshes." "I guess Casey is the brains of the whole bunch," put in Jimmy. "Probably the others didn't know anything about radio until he put them onto it. He'll be there all right, and he's likely to put up a pretty stiff fight before he lets himself be captured, for he knows what it means to him to be sent back to prison. With a new sentence tacked on to the old one, it'll probably mean that he'll be in for life." In a little while they reached the scene of the proposed robbery. They were well in advance of the time set by the plotters, and the chief took his time in carefully disposing his forces, availing himself of Frank Brandon's advice in doing this. The bridge stretched between two hills, at the bottom of which was a small stream about 100 feet below. On each side, almost down to the bridge itself, extended trees and shrubbery that afforded excellent hiding places. The only trouble was that both the outlaws and the officers who were trying to apprehend them were likely to seek the same shelter, and might in this way stumble across each other before the trap was ready to be sprung. This, however, was a contingency that had to be faced, and preparations were made accordingly. The men were placed at strategic points on both sides of the bridge. Whether the attempt at hold-up would be made at the entrance to the bridge or on the further side was a matter of speculation. The chief went on the theory, however, that it would probably take place at the entrance, and there he placed the majority of the men under him. The radio boys hinted that there was where they would like to be also, but in this the chief was adamant. "I've stretched a point in letting you young fire-eaters come along at all," he said. "As it is, I may have a hard time explaining to your parents, and I hate to think what my position would be if anything happened to you. So I'm going to put you where I think you'll be comparatively out of danger. You're just to be lookers-on at this shindig, and if the bullets begin to fly, you just lie flat on the ground behind the trees until they stop. It may not be so glorious, but it's likely to be a mighty sight more healthy." So, much against their will, the boys were compelled to obey orders and take the place assigned to them, which was on the further side of the bridge. "Putting us up in the gallery when we ought to have seats in the orchestra," grumbled Joe, as the boys ensconced themselves in the thicket behind a big clump of trees. "Cheer up, you old gloomhound," chafed Bob. "We may get in on this yet. At any rate, if we are in the gallery, we have a good view of the stage, or at least we shall have when the searchlight gets busy." The darkness deepened until the night became as black as Egypt. There was no moon, and even the stars were obscured by clouds that heavily veiled the sky. The night was chill, and the boys buttoned their coats tightly about them as they sat waiting for developments. They had perhaps an hour to wait, but it was not known but that some of the robbers would be on the ground at an earlier time than had been set, and every sense was on the alert as all strained their ears for the slightest sound, and peered into the darkness on the chance that they might catch glimpses of shadowy forms. After the first few moments, they had not ventured to talk for fear that they might be overheard. But this did not debar them from thinking, and they thrilled with excitement as they pictured each to himself the struggle that seemed about to take place on the road. The minutes dragged along interminably, and in the intense silence the lads could almost hear the beating of their hearts. Then, at a little distance, a twig cracked and sent the blood racing madly through their veins. Soon footsteps were heard approaching, and the lads crouched still lower in their hiding place. The sounds came nearer, and they could detect the tread of 2 men. They were approaching without any excessive degree of caution, as they had no reason to believe that their plans had been discovered. As they drew closer, the boys could hear them conversing in low tones. "I tell you it's all right," said a rough voice, which they recognized as that of Black Donegan. "All the fellows are tipped off and know just what they've got to do. Jake and Toppy will do the holding up, and then the rest of us will jump in if the driver cuts up rough. If he does, there'll be one more dead driver." The boys waited for the answer that seemed to be long in coming. What they heard finally was a whistle that made them jump. They had heard that whistle before. "Casey," whispered Bob to Joe. "Casey, as sure as you're born." The next instant his belief became a thrilling certainty. It isn't the driver," the voice came out with an explosive quality. "It's the guards he may have with him. The police are getting pretty leery about all the robberies that have been taking place around here lately, and they're..." Again came the whistle. "Got to do something or lose their jobs. At any rate, this is the last thing we're going to pull off around here." "I guess he's right about that," Joe whispered to Bob. "And just as soon as we're through with this, we'd better pull up stakes and try somewhere else." The voice was now so close at hand that if the boys had reached out of the thicket, they would almost have touched the speaker. At this thought, Jimmy and Herb especially felt a thrill of excitement. End of chapter 24. Recording by Tom Hirsch.